Friends, welcome to Life at Home, our everyday devotion series. We're in the Creed, we're in the section where it says we believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And this week we're going to be looking for the whole week at the church, the wonderful picture of the New Testament that talks about the church. And what we see particularly throughout the New Testament is the glory of the church. And that's what I want to be looking at with you today. We're going to start looking at Isaiah 2 verse 2 and looking at the theme of the mountain of the Lord. It says in Isaiah 2 verse 2, "In the last days the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many people will come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem.'" Now Jerusalem was built on a mountain. And we can see that the highest part of Jerusalem was the Temple Mount. That's where the temple was built. And in Jesus' day, the temple was rebuilt by Herod the Great, and it was a magnificent place. And many of the Jews would have thought, will this be it? Will this be what Isaiah had been talking about? People coming to see this wonderful temple. But no, God had a very different picture in mind. You see, from the very beginning, it had been all about the people of God. God started a family with Abram, and then that grew into a nation, Israel, and through that nation God was going to bless the whole earth. And this had very little to do with a physical mountain, a physical temple. This had all to do with people, and this is why Jesus had come. And we can see that when the church was birthed, it was very unimpressive. There were 12 disciples waiting on the Holy Spirit to come upon them. But when the Holy Spirit came upon them, something significantly changed. We can see in the Gospels, half the Gospels is full with the inadequacy of the disciples. They get it wrong every time. But when the Holy Spirit comes at Pentecost, something deeply changes in them. These become bold men that love Jesus and start to spread the gospel everywhere they go. Peter stands up at Pentecost and he shares the gospel, and 3,000 people get saved. A little while later, John and Peter find this crippled man. They heal him, preach the gospel, and it grows to 5,000 people, the early church in Jerusalem. A movement had started, something very significant. And then we can see in 70 AD, the persecution comes, and these people are dispersed all over the world, and the gospel starts to spread everywhere they go. We can see that the church starts to grow and grow and grow. And nowadays it says that the population today is 2.3 billion Christians on the earth. That's 29% of the population. But before we get all too excited about that, the question I want to look at today with you is the mountain of the Lord, the church, as glorious as Isaiah talks about in our day, in our nation, in our city, and in our lives? You see, over the last century, much has happened. Atheists have started to attack the gospel. It's been discredited. The Bible's been relegated as another book. Jesus just another nice person, and the church just an institution. There is very little to be excited about. When I talk to my friends about the church, they shrug their shoulders. They can't really believe that I even work for a church. It's of no interest to them. They say, I don't do church, and they don't feel like they miss out much. Why is that? Is the gospel no longer attractive? Is God no longer the God of power? Has this mountain of the Lord been bulldozed over into a nice flat little English hill that no longer stands out? Well, my friends, that cannot be. The picture that Isaiah talks about here was a prophecy. This is what is going to happen. This is what God is going to do. And before we get on to a crusade about restoring the church in our day and making sure that it gets back to the rightful position it needs and start to fight some criticism and push back on the atheists, the question really that I want to look at today is, does the church and does God have that central place in your life today? Is it that glorious mountain from which everything else revolves around? Or does God get tucked into the side of your life? You see, we're rather busy people. We don't really have much time to have a quiet time in the morning. We don't really have much time to go to church often. We're so busy in our lives that we need a lay-in on a Sunday morning. We're often so busy on our day off on a Saturday that we're tired on Sunday, and we just go to church maybe once in 3 weeks or so. And then maybe throughout the week we'll just go to life group now and then when we're not too tired, need an early night, or have other busy things cropping up in the way. We find it hard to have a quiet time in the morning or spend time with God at all. We can see that the definition of Christianity in our day is perhaps not quite what we have been used to. We can see that 53% of the population in the UK qualifies themselves as Christians, but only 6% of those are practicing Christians, and that definition of practicing Christians is a very thin one. 6% who maybe pray once a week, read their Bible once a week, and go to church once a month. My friends, if that's what that mountain has come to, then we're in a very pitiful place, and we're a very sorry place. We must see the power and the beauty of this mountain restored again. We need God to come and take the central place in our lives again, and we need Him. Some people say, well, I love Jesus, but I don't really do church. I'm afraid, my friends, if that's your conclusion, then you haven't really understood the gospel. You see, Jesus came to die and give Himself to gain Himself a bride. And that bride is the people of God. And the people of God is a community. They cannot just be individuals. Jesus didn't just come to die for me or just for you. He's come to give His life for all of us. And in the way that we live, we can only follow Jesus' words when we're in community. You can't love someone, forgive someone, or be living out the Christian values when you're not in a community. Jesus had this community in mind. He didn't have little hills in mind. He had a massive mountain in mind where people would come and flock to. Now, in our day, the church is in great decline. It's in great weakness. And what is it that needs to be done to see that turn around? Do we need another church growth program? Do we need another slick service, another activity, another alpha course, another outward-looking term, another program to save the church? No, my friends. That will not save the church. The only thing that can save the church is where it all began. People living with Jesus as their center stage in life, starting their days with Jesus, ending their days with Jesus, and everything in between. Ordinary people like the 12 disciples, filled with the power of the Holy Spirit. We need another revival. We need another revival of the church. We're in a place where we must start to pray for God to come and restore the glory of the church. Why? Because His glory is at stake. He has said that this mountain will be raised up high above all the other mountains, and that people will come to Him and ask Him to teach us His ways so that we may walk in His paths. It's the glory of God that's at stake. When the church is in decline, when the church is weakened, it's the glory of God that is at stake. And we must pray that God's glory will be restored, but it must start in our lives. It must start with us praying for ourselves that Jesus will take the center stage again. The start of the day, the end of the day, all in between. Asking God to take the center stage in our lives and giving ourselves to the church like Jesus gave Himself to the church. Perhaps we're not too far off from those 12 disciples sitting in an upper room, very unimpressive, but asking for the Holy Spirit to fill them to see the church being birthed. My friend, we want to see the church being birthed again in our day, in great glory, not with man-made buildings and programs, but in the power of God, the power of the Holy Spirit. So pray with me. Pray that Jesus will take the center stage of your life again. Pray for the church that it will grow magnificent and beautiful and glorious again. That God will defend His honor, and start to pray for those who are outside the church, that they may no longer shrug their shoulders, but turn their heads and start flogging to the mountain of the Lord, the glorious bride of Christ, the church. Jesus, at the start of this day, we want to come before You and we say, will You come and restore the rightful place of You in our lives? Lord, we want to live for You. We want this day to be about You. Help us not to tuck You in on the side, but to live for You at our center, at our core. Lord, forgive us when we have sought to bring other things into place, when we have been distracted